Lying at about 30 odd metres of water, approximately halfway between Hervey Bay and Bundaberg, is a 127 metre long ex-HMAS Tobruk, a Royal Australian Navy ship scuttled for divers on the 29th of June 2018. This is an unusual dive, and one that Jackie and I were very much looking forward to. The HMAS Tobruk was an amphibious heavy lift ship, constructed to the same specifications as the British Round Table class Navy ships. She was built in Newcastle, New South Wales, and commissioned by the RAND in 1981 to support the Army with logistics and troop equipment and deployments. The HMAS Tobruk was used in several theatres that the Australian Army and Navy were involved with, until in 2015 when the need for an amphibious heavy lift ship became less of a requirement for the Australian Armed Forces. It was offered to the New Zealand Royal Navy, who thought about it, but in the end decided that a boat big enough to ship their entire armed forces, as well as a fair proportion of the scouts, was a bit over the top. So after 34 years of distinguished service, it was decided to scuttle the Tobruk for recreational divers. Councils from around Australia are asked to submit tenders describing why the Tobruk should be scuttled in their waters. The Shires of Hervey Bay and Bundaberg decided that their bid would be more likely to succeed if they clubbed together. They were right, but just like an episode of The Simpsons, the success was also their downfall. The two Shires argued over the best location for it to be scuttled, both wanting to be just off their respective shores. In the end, they compromised on a site halfway between the two. Obviously, they never spoke to any divers about this location, as it's quite deep, well over 30 metres, and is heavily affected by wind, weather and tides, meaning only experienced divers can dive it on the slack in good weather, which there is actually much less of than the Queensland tourism commercials keep telling us, making scheduling recreational dive operations quite difficult. The scuttling itself was a complete disaster. Charges were poorly laid, and the ship went down sideways, ending up completely on a starboard side, only held up by the bulwarks. This made this dive quite challenging, as it's not how you would imagine a ship would look, but with the walkways, entrances and decks all being 90 degrees to what you would expect. For me, it made the dive much more interesting and challenging. The day we drove the Tobruk, as you can see, visibility was terrible. Probably the worst ever according to the locals. The descent is down to the stern of the ship, just above the rear doors of the tank deck. Here we cruised along the wall of a walkway, with the portside guardrails and bulwarks above our head along to the bow. Along the way we found a pair of octopuses. It is octopuses and not octopi, so I found out, who like to show us their colour-changing abilities. Dropping down to the seafloor, completely covered in small oysters, we met some of the resident fish that like to hang out here. Snapper were the most common around this day, with some good-sized pinkies coming in for a good look. Turtles also like to hang out on this wreck, although sometimes they just don't find their way out. We did come across two much more active green turtles though. It's turtle breeding season at the moment, and the local divers with us said they didn't recognise these guys, so they must be out-of-towners coming in for a root. Penetrating the wreck is just awesome. With all of the passengers being at 90 degrees, doorways become low and wide, and turns in corridors require you to move up or down rather than around. When we came across the ship's heads, all in a row, we had to swim up through them rather than across, making them more like a block of flats rather than toilet stalls that you might expect. Negotiating stairwells was also interesting. There's not so much as going up and down the stairs, but more around through to get past. Many of the key features of the ship, such as the engines, had been grilled off, which was a shame, but there was enough to explore and to serve the old girl, with lots of resident fish having taken up residence in all sorts of odd places. Coming out the end of the ship, we came across one of the biggest Queensland gropers I've ever seen. This guy was way bigger than me, at over 2 metres in length and estimated between 300 and 450 kilos in weight. He just kind of looked over his shoulder at me and swam off, annoyed that such a noisy creature had disturbed him. So in the end, despite the poor visibility, this dive was just awesome. Definitely one of our favourites. We'll no doubt be back to do her again, and hopefully next time the conditions will be a little better.